hey guys, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to be here in front of this group. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Just so help me set the stage really quickly. How many of you have seen me, heard me present before? How many of you want me to stand up here and try to scare you? So I thought I would switch it up this year. I figure you guys pretty much know, don't click on things you're not supposed to click on. Don't open emails from strangers. Don't download things onto a thumb drive and take them to your kid's computer. I mean, you pretty much get the gist, right? So we're going to switch it up a little bit today. We're going to talk about the cloud, but we're going to talk about it from a security standpoint. But so help me set the stage really quickly. I'm going to define the cloud for you because there are 1,000 definitions for it, and we're going to define one that we can at least agree on for the next 40 minutes or so. I'm going to talk about some financial industry specific cloud providers, and we're going to talk about a few of those. We're going to talk about public cloud options, and we're going to kind of navigate through who is and isn't doing that today and which vendors you may have that are already doing it. You may not know you're in the public cloud. I'm really going to spend the time on the security piece and then what do the regulators think? Because I guess at the end of the day, if we listen to Chairman Vice this morning and then we listen to our congressman speak, you know, if the regulators don't agree with this, it doesn't really matter what I tell you to do, I would think. And then I'll answer any questions that you guys have, but you don't have to wait till the end. If you have a question, throw the hand up and we'll jump on it. And then that should take us through the time here. So let's jump right in. Let me ask you this question. How many of you guys have ever heard somebody say before that there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's computer? That's a meme that's been pretty popular out there, not this particular picture per se, but this saying has been pretty common for about 15 years now, that when trying to explain to somebody what is the cloud, they say, well, the cloud's just doing your computing on somebody else's computer. And I guess in a nutshell, that's probably true. But in reality, what makes the cloud different are a couple of things. And I'm going to rely on NIST here to help us out, the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, not because we always have to trust our government, but in this case, we're going to choose to trust our government. And they have a pretty good definition of what the cloud is. And the cloud really kind of fits in one of these 5 categories. So number 1, on-demand self-service. And what does that mean? Think about in your private life. How many of you have ever gotten a new phone, Apple phone, Android phone, whatever? You open it up, you go through the setup pieces, and it wants you to, create an account, whether it's your Apple ID, whether it's your Google ID, whatever that may be. That's that self-service portion, on demand, setting it up yourself. You don't need an IT person to sit beside you and spin up a bunch of resources for your stuff to work. So number 2, broad network access. What does that mean? It means I can go anywhere. If I can connect to the network, to the internet, I can connect to my resource, right? So I can sit in Starbucks, I can sit in the Hilton hotel room, I can sit in my office on the wireless network or be plugged in and wired up, and I should be able to get to that resource. It's ubiquitously available to me wherever I happen to be in the world. The third is resource pooling. Now we get a little bit technical, but what does that mean? It's a little bit like, it's called oversubscription if you want to think of it this way. So Amazon, the number 1 cloud provider in the world, right? They don't build one PC for every person that might decide they need a cloud PC and just stack them up on top of each other, right? They oversubscribe, they build these resource pools, and they can shift resources around. And when I say resources, what do I mean? Technology-wise, I mean really the 3 components of your computer or your server. That's your RAM or the memory, that's the processing that does the mathematical computations, and that's the storage. So you're sharing these resources. And if you can share these resources and if they're elastic, then that really kind of defines it as a cloud. Fourth is that rapid elasticity. How quickly can I scale? So if you've got a server in your office and you decide that we're going to double the size of our client base tomorrow because of an acquisition, and you want to double the size of that server tomorrow, well, what do you have to do? Well, you've got to go get new physical space, right? You've got to go probably buy a new server, get that server in, put it in a rack, get it spun up, whatever your IT people are going to do to it. So that expansion takes, in today's world with supply chain logistics, 6 months. But in reality, that's a multi-week process in the best of scenarios. In a cloud environment, it's literally a few keystrokes. You can do it within a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or you can build your system so it does it automatically for you. It just scales itself automatically up and down as you need resources. And then the last thing that makes it cloud is it's a measured service. Now, most of us probably aren't used to that, but that's the model that was built. So if you're an AWS, Amazon Web Services, or a big Google Cloud client or an IBM Cloud client, that metered service a lot of these services, you're only billed for the time that the processing is actually taking place. And what does that mean? Well, that means if I turn on the server at 5:30 p.m. to run my after end of day cash reconciliation process, and it's running in the cloud, and it runs from 5:30 to 7:15, and at 7:15 it's done, and then it sends my reports out to wherever they need to go. That system shuts down. I'm only paying for the service from 5:30 p.m. to 7:15 p.m., and then it's dark. And that resource pool is being pulled back in, and somebody else is using those resources now to do something else. I'm painting a picture that's not exactly the way it works, but that's pretty much the definition of how we would call a cloud today. So that's the cloud state. So let me ask you this question. Serious show of hands. How many of you have your core processor on premises in your own building, in your own data center? So then by show of hands, how many of you have your core processor hosted by your core vendor? Should be the rest of you, right? If I can do math, it should be however many people are in here minus the number of 5 of you that stuck your hands up. So most of you already are familiar with 1, 2, or all of these cloud-based providers, right? Everybody up there, and I just picked a snapshot. I didn't try to pick every company that's out there. But every one of these companies is a cloud services provider to our industry today. Now, that doesn't mean we all take advantage of it, right? You can be on CSI and you can have it on-prem. You can be on Jack Henry and have a hybrid environment where some of it's on-prem and some of it's in their cloud. You can be on Finxact and it's only in the cloud. They don't even offer an on-prem solution. You know, NXTsoft is the same way. InContracts is a completely cloud-based solution. AvidXchange has both because of an acquisition they made, but their goal is to be 100% cloud only by the end of 2023. So if you start to look through some of these vendors, this is where we're headed with the cloud. But let me ask you this question. How many of you today have a presence of any type in what we would call a public cloud? And a public cloud would be an Amazon, an Azure, a Google. I'd say Alibaba, but if you raise your hand for that one, we're going to have a side chat, unless you're the Bank of China. So at least one of you do. The reality is probably all of you do and you don't even know it. Because most of these providers, not all, but most of these providers rely in some or in part on those public clouds. So, you know, CSI has their own data centers at Paducah and Valparaiso, but they're working fervently to build it out in Microsoft's Azure. Jack Henry has the same initiative going with AWS. FIS is already in AWS. Fiserv is already in AWS. NXTsoft is in AWS. InContracts, Abrigo, Finxact is actually partially in AWS, partially in Azure. So you get the point. So let's talk about who these top cloud providers are. Hopefully, and they're in order, by the way, hopefully the left-hand side of the screen looks familiar to you. So Amazon, Azure, Google, Oracle, Alibaba. That is the top 5 cloud providers in the world as of 2022, as of July 31st. That's in total resources allocated, and they do it in data center metrics, but it's a total data center metrics. That's the list. And then you've got IBM, Tencent, OVH, DigitalOcean, and Linode. So those are your top 10 providers. So let me ask you this question. How many of you have something hosted by a provider that's not your core and it's not on this list? Whether that's hosted solution, who's it with?
I think so. Well, like maybe our imaging software.
Okay, so your imaging software, okay. Do you know what the brand is? Okay, it doesn't matter. Anybody else know if you're hosting someplace like in a Connectria or a TierPoint or any other regional data center, a Green Cloud, a QMS? Just asking. I'm not. Okay, all good. So this is where you want to play, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, about why you want to be here. Not that these others aren't good. So please don't hear me say, oh my God, I'm in TierPoint, and he didn't put TierPoint on the slide, I must be in trouble. That's not what we mean at all. What that just means is that you probably have a little extra due diligence to do on your side. So let me ask you this question. How many of you are going to invest 5.7% of your net operating income in cybersecurity in 2022? None of you? Probably not. Less, would you say? Most likely? So this is why I talk about Microsoft's cloud and why I'm a big believer in Microsoft's cloud. So you go back to any of these names. Great list of names. AWS does a great job. Google does a great job if you want to be in a specific type of cloud. Oracle does a fantastic job if you run a specific type of hardware and software. But Azure is Microsoft's cloud offering. And every single one of you, I don't know how safe I feel making this bet. I'm going to go ahead and make it. Every single one of you runs in Azure's cloud today. How many of you have Office 365 as your email? Everybody? Anybody not have Office 365 as your email platform? So if you have Office 365 as your email platform, you're already running in Microsoft's Azure cloud. So again, I want to show you, Microsoft last year, they made a $1 billion investment in cybersecurity. And they've done that every year for 6 years in a row. And then guess what? Last year came along, and it was after, what are some of the things I talked about at the show last year? You know, after the food services company, after SolarWinds, after the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline, all these other events. Guess what Microsoft realized one day? Satya Nadella woke up one day and he said, you know what? Not one of those big data breaches was our fault. Microsoft didn't do any of this. But guess who gets blamed for it? Guess whose name is at the center of the bullseye, right? Microsoft. So he's like, hey guys, if we're going to get blamed for this, then we need to get some money for it. And if we're going to get some money for it, then we need to make some investments for it. So here's what happened. Last August, so almost a year ago, they said, hey, we're going to quadruple our investment. We're going to invest $4 billion in cybersecurity every year. So put that in perspective. Now, they're $168 billion in revenue last year, so what is that, $4 billion? It's, if I did my math right, it's 1.4% of their revenue, give or take. And then of their operating income, I think they had $70 billion in operating income last year, so it's about 5.8% of their operating income. But still, we're not going to make that investment. And this is what I tell people all the time that question about going to the cloud, because what are the arguments we hear about going to the cloud? What are some of the arguments that you've either argued yourself or had your IT people say? You give up control, right? You know, if it's in my building, I know where it is. I can go touch it and I can watch the lights blink and it's mine. That's where my data is. If it's going to the cloud, well, I don't know who those guys are. You know, what kind of due diligence do I have to do on those folks? And there's 1,000 reasons why you could give to not go to the cloud. And I'm going to give you a really good graphic here in a second to explain it. But the bottom line is we'll never be able to make the investment in our entire lifetime that Microsoft is going to make just this year in cybersecurity to protect their cloud. So if you put your data and your client's data in their cloud, you're getting that level of protection without you having to make that investment. You're making it through a subscription process, but you're not going to have to make that capital investment. So let's look at what that really means. And I love this graphic. It's very busy, and I get it, but I think it tells the story so very well when people want to argue about on-premises versus the cloud. So your on-premises on the left-hand side of the screen, and your cloud is on the right-hand side of the screen. And a lot of times we focus on that 68.9%, and that's where we get into the argument over this cloud thing. And by the way, I've validated these numbers. It's amazing to me. So these numbers go back to 2012 all the way through 2021. They don't change. That 9%, that 68% are very, very stable for 9 straight years. So on the left-hand side, the 9% that you would spend on software licenses, you buy the licensing from Microsoft or whatever that is that you're going to put your cloud in, put your services in. But everything below the waterline here on this graphic, you now have to take control of in-house. So you now have to own customization and implementation of that software if you're going to customize it, if you're going to implement it. Which version are you on? Are all your users on the same version? I was at a law firm this morning down the street where they're having this exact issue. They've got 110 people in their law firm. They've got this amazing piece of software, and they've got 3 or 4 different versions of it out there. They're not standardized inside their firm. And it's causing them a lot of struggles. You've got to buy the hardware that runs on. And guess what? You don't buy it once. You've got to buy it every 3 to 5 years, depending on your depreciation cycle and what type of hardware it is. So you've got to continually upgrade that hardware. You've got to own it. You've got to capitalize that. You've got to have your team install it. Your team has to support it. Your team has to patch it, update it, make sure it's working all the time. Power, backup, generators, all those things that go with that, that's now your responsibility, right? You've got to have the staff to run it. And frankly, I don't necessarily agree with that number at 14% if anybody of you have tried to hire good IT people in the last 12 to 18 months. I hire a lot of IT people at my company, and I can tell you salaries are up exorbitantly for good quality people because there's, I think, one qualified candidate for every 2.5 to 3 unfilled IT and cybersecurity jobs in the country right now. It's crazy. But if we just go with the graphic, 14% of the cost is just the personnel to support all this. Then you got to maintain it, and then you got to train on it. So all that is you, that 91% that you don't see if you decide to do this yourself. And by the way, this isn't a cloud pitch like go to the cloud. I'm just trying to make some points about the cloud versus on-premises. If you're in the cloud, that subscription fee is much higher than the software fee, right? So I mean, if you went and Microsoft won't even sell it to you this way today, but if let's just say that they still did and you wanted to buy Microsoft Exchange licenses and you compare Exchange licenses for 50 users and 50 subscriptions for Office 365, well, the subscriptions are going to cost a heck of a lot more than the licenses themselves. But you don't see the other 91%. And that's the key. So over here, you have this subscription fee, and all you have to do is have training and make sure it's configured properly, and everything else is on the provider. Everything else is on the cloud provider. It's their hardware, it's their data center, it's their power, it's their internet, it's their backup. All those things are them. You outsource that to them. But let's talk about what that looks like, and then we'll get into the risk piece here, because this is where cybersecurity starts to kick in here. So this is a great graphic. I love this graphic. This is from Microsoft, but all the providers have a similar graphic for you. And it's called the shared responsibility model or the shared responsibility engine. Some of them call it at Amazon, shared responsibility matrix at Google. But essentially what it's saying is, hey, if you choose to go to the cloud, you're going to offload a lot of the heavy lifting to the cloud provider, but you still have responsibilities. So in this example, everything that's blue is still yours, and everything that's black is the provider's, and if it's split, it's obviously split. And then they give you 4 different options here. So obviously, if you decide to build it on premises, which is the second column, but the left-hand column of the 4, those are all blue dots. That is 100% on you. If you go to infrastructure as a service, you guys know what that means? Infrastructure as a service means, hey, I'm going to buy the software from CSI. I'm just use CSI as an example. I'm going to buy the CSI software, but I'm not going to buy hardware. I'm going to go to a data center and I'm going to rent basically the infrastructure, and I'm going to install it on this, so I don't ever have to buy servers, buy storage, install storage, all that. That's going to be in the data center, but I still own the software licenses. So that's infrastructure as a service, and you can see you start to give up some black. You give up physical security at the bottom. It's not your data center. You don't have to worry about the locks on the doors. Your hosting infrastructure, that's going to be a split between you, your IT people, and the data center. The data center is going to give you this rack of stuff, and then your team logs in and takes over and runs it on that rack of stuff, but you don't own it. So you don't have to buy it, you don't have to capitalize it, but you still have to maintain it. And then the network control is the same. You've got to control who can access it, how they access it, what they can do when they access it, just like you do today. And then everything above that's all on you. And I'm going to skip the PaaS, which is platform as a service, because very few of you are going to use that. I'm going to move straight to SaaS, software as a service, because that's the world we live in today. So in the software as a service world, you can see a whole lot more black on that screen and a whole lot less blue. And what you end up with, regardless of where you go, is your focus on data classification and accountability. And what does that mean? Well, that's the stuff that we're already worried about. That's the stuff that we're already doing with you. This is you protecting your data and your client's data and putting the best controls in place. And this is where the FFIECs of the world step in and start to tell us how to do our job, right? Usually in a pretty good way. So does this make sense? Regardless of what you do from a cloud perspective, you own data and you own the control of the data. So let's talk about what do the regulators see. So what does the FFIEC think about this? What does the FDIC, OCC, CFPB, I know we're not dealing with that, but it was funny to hear him talk about it during lunch. And this is what they care about. They want to know, do you have a good risk management and risk mitigation strategy? Have you thought this through? When you decided to outsource, did you go through a risk assessment? And we'll talk about what those risk assessment questions need to look like in a second. But did you look at this? And did you think about the cybersecurity? Or did you just think, oh, I gave it to Amazon, it's not my problem now? The second thing is they want to know, Do you have good service level expectations, and do you have a good solid agreement that outlines that? So service level agreement is a term that I think gets often overlooked in vendor management. We kind of check the box, and it's like, yeah, do we have an SLA? Yep, we got it. Yep, we can call for support. Yeah, if it's down for more than a day, they got to give us a 1% rebate, whatever is in the SLA. But I think when you start to deal with a cloud provider, you really have to get into the weeds of their service level agreement, because they're all very, very different. And depending on what type of service you're getting from that cloud provider, are you just buying space and then running your services, or are you buying everything from them? So think about your core hosting, right? Imagine if CSI or Jack Henry, who are our CSI shops in here? How about Jack Henry? Got the one. FIS, Fiservs, and most of you, if not one or two, all hosted for the most part. So imagine if your agreement with them, with CSI or Fiserv or whoever that is, was, hey, we're going to put this in a data center, and if the data center goes down, that's not on us. I'm CSI speaking now. That's not on us. You're going to have to accept that risk. So they want you to let them put it in their data center, but they're telling you if the power goes down in the data center, that's on you to figure out how to fix it. That's utterly ridiculous, right? Nobody's going to ever do that. They're not going to tell you that, and we're not. But that's the things we have to look at. Believe it or not, there are providers out there that have caveats like that in their SLA. Now, none of those top 10 that I showed you, but there are providers, I've seen their service level agreement, where they don't accept the responsibility for a physical failure of the hardware. So types of clouds, private, public, and hybrid. Private cloud is all you built it, it's your data center, you own it, it just isn't physically in your building. I don't think any of you are going to do that in 2022 moving forward. Public cloud is what we've already been talking about. It's a publicly available cloud by a top 10, hopefully, provider or a very reputable provider, and then you're going to use parts of those resources to build your solution. And then the hybrid cloud is where most of us end up today, where it's somewhat public cloud, it's somewhat private cloud. So I've got some things that sit in my server room or my data room, and I've got some things that sit at CSI, and they talk to each other, and they cross-pollinate with each other. And so, for example, you might say, well, wait a minute, that's not cloud if it's in my data room. Well, technically it's not, but technically it is if your data room is in Paducah. Well, it's a bad example because we're talking about CSI. If your data room's in Lexington and your office is in Louisville and you're accessing it from Louisville back to Lexington, that's technically a cloud solution. That's a private cloud solution. But you're also using CSI's cloud, which is a public cloud solution. So now you've got a hybrid cloud solution. Does that make sense? And that's where most of you are going to end up. And then again, we've already talked about software as a service, platform and infrastructure as a service, but this is what the FFIEC wants to make sure that you clearly understand and can articulate from your vendors. So now let's dig into the risk piece, because this is where it gets kind of fun, at least in my world. So there's 6 major risk categories associated with outsourcing to a cloud vendor. And this is where I could sit here and tell you scary stories and try to pump you up, but I'm not going to do that to you today because I've probably done that to you enough times in my lifetime. So the biggest risk, and the number one risk that you want to look at, and it's probably the one that most of us look at first, is the cost risk, right? What is this going to cost me to pay somebody else to do it versus what can I hire and pay somebody to do it for me in Litchfield, Kentucky, right? Or Lexington, Kentucky, or Paducah, Kentucky, or wherever I happen to be. And then there's the management risk. And I had this again, I'm using a fresh example because I was in a law firm making a presentation this morning about pretty much this exact thing. Management risk. Do you have internal management that is capable of assessing and actually managing the third-party vendor? Do you even know what questions to ask them? Do you know what good looks like? Do you know how to read through their SLA and even understand what they're telling you? Or is it a lot of gobbledygook, tech speak over your head stuff? And so this is where I think a lot of institutions fall short, is they don't have anybody on site in their bank or on their team, whether it's a consultant or a member of their team, that understands the technology enough to ask good questions. To me, that's a huge risk, is we end up then having to put a lot of faith in vendors and a lot of trust in vendors, and we don't even know what good due diligence looks like. They send us a package and we're like, oh, I read their SOC report, I guess it's pretty good. Sounds like they got 2 data centers and they've got extra battery backup, and if the power goes out, they can get it back up on in 15 minutes or less, or whatever it might say, right? But you don't really know what that's asking. And so that expertise comes in, right? Do I have the expertise to go along with that management to voir dire them correctly, to ask them the right questions? because you can't outsource the data and the governance piece, right? We've already talked about that. You can outsource the running of it, but you can't outsource the management of it. And then there's logistics risk. So what is a logistics risk here? Anybody have an example? So if I'm going to outsource something to a third-party vendor, what's the logistics piece of that? I'll give you a good example. So how many of you use Finastra Laser Pro in some way, shape, or form, or MortgageBot, or one of their systems? And so you've got a core provider sometimes. Not everybody does this, but let's just pretend like you're using Abrigo and Nextoff and some of these other tools. And you've got your core, and you've got your Laser Pro, and they all talk to each other, right? So this data moves from cloud A to cloud B, right? So now you've got this governance issue of moving data from provider A to provider B, but whose data is it? It's always your data / your client's data, right? It doesn't belong to them. But now you've got to be able to transition data from provider A to provider B, and this is where I see another big, I'm not going to call it a failure, but a big oversight issue that we miss is these data connectors, what they call APIs. And so you've got, in the fintech world, for every new big fintech processing company, there's probably 20 little bitty fintech companies with 3 to 10 employees who are creating these data connectors or APIs to make all these systems talk to each other. How many of you guys use, well, I'm not even going to name any names. There's a couple of them out there, though, where you have to put it into an escrow account. A software goes into an escrow account. Anybody guys familiar with a software escrow? You all know what an escrow account is, obviously. So a software escrow account is just what I'm just going to describe. If you've got a software company with 4 employees in Boston, Massachusetts, and they've written this code that makes your core processor data accessible to this other piece of software that's going to pull it out to run documentation on it. Well, this little company might be 3, 5 employees, and they might be venture capital backed. I'm giving you a real example. I'm not going to name the company. They might be venture capital backed. And if you do due diligence on them and you ask for their financials, they may send you a document that says, we're not going to disclose our financials. We'll just tell you that we're not making money and we don't plan to make money for the next 6 years. That's part of our business plan. We're on a hyper growth scale. And a lot of SaaS companies, that's exactly their model. How many bodies, how many users can I get on my platform? And I'm going to lose money the whole time I'm doing that until all of a sudden one day I make money. So if you just looked at their financial due diligence package, you'd go, holy moly, we can't use these guys. So what they do is they've created a software escrow. So they write this code for you. They write this specific API, which is a piece of software code. And that API is designed to make your core processor talk to whatever that piece of software is. And it's customized a lot of times for you because you've got custom fields in your core and over here. And then they give you the code in an escrow account. It literally goes into like a software vault where you have access to it and they have access to it. But if they were to go bankrupt and cease to exist tomorrow, you at least have the code. Now you have to go hire somebody else to go write against it and develop on it, but you now own it, as opposed to the risk of it just disappeared. They went bankrupt today and their assets got seized, and now you can no longer talk between platforms. So that's a very real risk. And again, one that I think a lot of people miss. We get caught up in the world, and I'm not picking on NXTsoft. I love these guys, but I think they're really good at coming in and glossing over some of these risks because they want to make it easy for you, who are non-technical largely, to consume the ability and understand the ability. We can make these two systems talk to each other. I can make this cloud talk to this cloud. I can make CSI talk to Finastra's cloud. I can make Encompass talk to Jack Henry, whatever they may be. I can make Abrigo talk to Banker's Dashboard, talk to this, talk to that, right? And eventually we're going to end up with 3, 5, 8, 10, 100 of these things talking to each other. And where does that data live? And where does it go? That's the logistics piece. The brand piece. Brand and culture, right? So let's talk about culture for a second. How many of you have in-house IT folks? At least one, right? So what does that do to your culture if all of a sudden you're telling them, you're not using these words, but I'm going to be the IT guy or girl for a second. This is what I hear when you tell me you're moving to the cloud. You don't trust me anymore. You don't think I can do this myself. You don't have faith in me. Or wait a minute, my job security just went out the window because you're not going to need me anymore, right? Who knows what people hear, right, when they hear that. But you're now moving this to somebody else's cloud, and now you've got this cultural issue. But what's your brand risk? What's the brand risk of making a move like this to the cloud? And have you considered that? It's one thing, right, if you're sitting in your bank at Springfield, Kentucky, and there is a data incident, and you own it, and you control it, you have responsibility for it. It's a completely different thing if you have all of your stuff in Azure, we'll just pick Azure as a name, and Microsoft has a data incident. And now your clients can't access their data, or their data gets exposed. And it was a vendor that they didn't pick, right? They didn't pick Azure, they picked you. So what's the brand risk there? And again, I'm not telling you don't do it, I'm just saying make sure we're thinking about these things. And then the last one is the technical risk. You know, does the provider you've chosen have the technical chops to do what you need them to do? And again, that might come back to the management and expertise risk, because do you have the technical chops to ascertain whether or not they know what they're doing? And so how do you do that, right? Well, you talk to other people that have used them, right? You go out to the market and you say, okay, well, you know, ABC company, who else has used ABC company? You talk to other bankers that have used them, and you know, you've got to figure that out. You're not going to know everything. I get that. But those are the risk areas. So one of the things that we did, and I'm happy to share this with anybody who wants this, we'll make it available to you afterwards. We created a risk assessment that looks at just these things. And I'm showing you a snapshot of it. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You've probably seen a format like this before. Use the same format for our red flags risk assessments. But essentially, we built it with these questions in mind. We've got expertise risk, logistics, brand culture, management, technical cost, all the way down. And I think there's 14 questions on this. And it's a cloud service provider specific risk assessment that you can go through, and you can figure out your likelihood and impact of each of these different things. So like a question here on logistics. Has the bank requested the cloud service provider's vendor due diligence package and reviewed to understand their SLAs? You know, what's the likelihood and impact and severity? And then we can put our controls in place, right? We can talk about what we've done from a vendor due diligence perspective. And then we can weight what is the mitigation of that control. Is it high mitigation, medium mitigation, low mitigation, no mitigation? We'll end up with a final risk score. And we can actually, before we ever decide to outsource to a cloud vendor, we can ask ourselves these 14 questions, and we can determine what's our risk here, and does the board or executive management, does their risk appetite allow for this decision? Now, I think a lot of you who've gone to the cloud or use a cloud service provider, you've probably done this. You just didn't probably do it this formally. Probably you sat in rooms and asked questions. You probably had your IT folks and some other folks in your risk team sit around and talk this through. But this is a tool I think that you guys can use to really figure out, is this right for me? And again, we'll make this available to you, no charge. So let's talk about the security that you need to be sure is in place with any of your cloud providers. And this would include inside your own offices if you're deciding to do this yourself. It doesn't change. You should still be worried about these same 9 categories. And so number 1, Zero Trust Network. Anybody here on the Zero Trust Network or investigating Zero Trust Network or looking at me like deer in the headlights because you've never heard of Zero Trust Network? Yeah, so Zero Trust Network it was cutting edge 2 years ago. It was bleeding edge 4 years ago. It's becoming more mainstream today. I'm a big believer in it. We use it at ImageQuest. And it means just what it says. It's take it at face value. It is a zero trust network access. I don't trust you, and I don't trust your computer. Period. And so I've got to validate that you are you, and that your computer is a computer that I know and want on my network or with access to my things. And so how many of you use VPN? Keep your hands up if you love VPN. Couple of hands, okay. So ZTNA can also eliminate the need for VPN, because ZTNA is an always-on VPN connection to the resources you need when properly configured. So I'm a ZTN user. I'm on the Hilton's wireless network right now with my laptop. My laptop is magically connected back to all the cloud resources I need, whether they're at Microsoft, Azure, whether they're at AWS, whether it's at Citrix, wherever it needs to be. My computer knows where to go, and it magically creates these tunnels. I don't ever have to log in to a VPN. I don't have to remember to log in. Oh, I forgot to log in, I'm in the hotel. Or I can't get to this resource because I didn't log in. All that just happens for me automatically with the Zero Trust Network access. So cutting edge 2 years ago, I would tell you, talk to your IT folks about that today. This is one of those questions that I would tell you, in 2023, absolutely in 2024, that's going to be a question on your cyber insurance questionnaire. Do you have a Zero Trust Network? Second is managed detection and response, or SIM. I think you guys know what that is. That this is event logging and monitoring and making sure that we are capturing traffic on the network. A lot of you are using SIMs of some type or managed detection and response engines of some type already. But even if you're in the cloud, you want to make sure that either you have it or the cloud provider has it. In most cases, a public cloud provider is not going to provide that. If you go to CSI, they absolutely have it. Jack Henry absolutely has it. Your big providers that you're using from a financial institution standpoint, they're using managed detection and response and SIM tools already. But if you're building it yourself in a cloud, right, then you need to bring your own SIM along with it to make sure that you can monitor that activity. And then having an operations center to go with that security operations center, because we've moved past the point, folks, of, hey, I got an alert on my computer and it opened up a ticket with the help desk. And they'll get to it, even if they get to it in 15 minutes or an hour, which is sometimes a pretty good response. What kind of damage can your computer, if it's infected, sitting on your bank's network, do in 15 minutes or an hour? So making sure that you have someone that's watching it in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's not going to be your people, that's going to be an outsourced partner. And they usually go hand in hand. The managed detection and response, a lot of the good ones have their own security operations center that comes with it. And then vulnerability management. How many of you guys, once a year, because you have to, whether you like it or not, pay a third party to come in and do a penetration test or a vulnerability assessment of your network? And then you get this really thick report, right, with greens and yellows and reds on it, and you sit down with your IT person and you say, hey, Jay, what's this mean, man? And Jay's like, don't worry about it, we got this, right? That's pretty much accurate of what happens. And then you report it to the audit committee or whichever committee that goes up to, and it gets filed away, and then you probably stop thinking about it again until next year when it's time to do it again. And that worked for years and years and years. And if you just want to meet the standards of the FFIEC and your regulators, that actually still works. But the reality is this. Those vulnerabilities change every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month of the entire year. So you have a vulnerability test yesterday, tomorrow it's useless to me. So a good tool, this managed detection response, a good tool will also have vulnerability management built into it, where you're getting a daily vulnerability scan of what's changed on your network in the last 24 hours. And either your third-party partner or your IT team, or usually in concert, are working together to remediate those things in real time. So you might say, well, wait a minute, what's this vulnerability thing you're talking about? So we know what patching is, right? We all know we have to patch because that's something the FFIEC asks us, and we probably talk about it in steering committee meetings, and we report it up to the board, right? But so we typically patch. If you're really good, you're probably patching weekly. Most of you are patching monthly, depending on what the system is. We've moved, at ImageQuest, we've moved to a daily patching schedule for this exact reason, because we started getting these daily vulnerability reports, and we're like, holy moly. We got vulnerabilities every single day, not just once a month, not just once a week, not just when Microsoft says that they've released a new release on Tuesday. We're running these patches now every single day. And so you can get into a cycle of that, and guess what? It sounds like more overhead for your IT team. It's actually less. Because a lot of that's automated, right? We set these automated engines to go out and find the devices and patch them. And it just happens every day. It just happens. And you have far fewer of these incidents where, oh my gosh, these 27 machines didn't get patched for a whole month and we missed them, and now we've got to go figure out how. That gets overcome a lot if you move to a daily vulnerability management program and daily patching. Endpoint detection and response, I just sort of described it. Managed detection, response, and endpoint. The only difference is the managed detection is on the whole network. The endpoint's on the computer. So I'll give you the great example of how this works. I already told you, if you got your computer, you got the pop-up. It sends a ticket to the help desk automatically. But your computer's still on the network, right? And it's still working. Traditional antivirus, you know that it happened or you don't. It depends on how it's set. But let's just say that your IT team now knows, hey, your machine has a problem. But your machine's still on the network. And then an hour later, an IT guy comes over to your desk and says, hey, we ran a scan on your device, and yeah, it does have malware on it. We need to take your device away, right? So they take your computer away from you. Maybe they bring you a loaner. Maybe they don't, depending on your situation. Then they take their computer back to the shop. Meanwhile, remember, it was on the network for an hour before they got there, whatever it was doing. And then how long does it take on average, if I take your computer away, how long does it take for IT to bring it back to you? If they got to go clean it up and bring it back? Is that 15 minutes? An hour? A day? 2 days? 3 days? A week? Do you have loaners? Are you using somebody else's? When you get the loaner, is all your stuff where you wanted it? Could you get to everything that you wanted to get to? We all know the answer. So with a good endpoint detection and response, focus on the R in response. Two things happen that are different from your traditional antivirus. Number one, as soon as it detects something on your computer, it isolates your computer on the network. It literally stops its ability to transmit data or receive data wirelessly or wired. Doesn't shut the computer down, doesn't break anything. It actually preserves what we call forensic evidence, but it stops the transmission of data. So you can't spread that virus or that malware if you happen to have it. The second thing it does is back in the Security Operations Center, where they're looking at this, if they do a little investigation, they figure out, hey, you know what? You did have something wrong with your computer. You got this malware, you probably clicked on a link, whatever that may be. They can, and I'm not oversimplifying, they can literally press a button and your computer will roll back to 10 seconds before the event that triggered the alert. It will literally put itself back into the state it was in right before the alert. And all that takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And your computer never has to leave your desk for that to happen. Pretty good trade-off, I would think. So this is endpoint detection and response. And oh, by the way, it's not just Milton telling you this. Your insurance providers are telling you this too. Endpoint detection and response is a question that's on every single cyber insurance questionnaire in 2022. And by 2023, it'll be a disqualifier. If you don't have it, you probably won't get cyber insurance, or you'll have a written down policy. Security awareness training, you guys all know it and love it, right? You want to put your people through training program. It's a critical piece of security. Whether you're in the cloud or not, it doesn't matter where your users are accessing the data, your users still need to go through the same training, right? Your users can still be just as vulnerable to bad actors, whether your data lives in my cloud, your cloud, somebody else's cloud, or on-premise. Password management is another one that I think is critical, and it's even more critical when you move to a cloud-based situation. Making sure that you are providing, how many of you are providing a password management tool for your team, for your bank? A managed tool, just a couple of you? I would highly encourage you to look at that this year. That is not a big spend. This is not something that breaks the bank on spend. I mean, you can get a really good password management tool for your bank for somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 per user per year, $5 a month. Really good, enterprise class, fully managed. Your IT team can own and manage that. It's not a big deal. And matter of fact, a lot of your IT folks would probably enjoy having that as another project to work on. I'm not saying they don't have anything to work on. Don't hear me that way. But seriously, this is the kind of thing that they know makes their life easier if you deploy that at the bank. They know it makes you safer. Data loss prevention. You guys said earlier you all have Office 365. Any of you know if you have data loss prevention turned on? You even know what data loss prevention is? So data loss prevention is a critical piece of Office 365 that most people don't know exists and don't use. And guess what? I'm not going to say it's free, but it's included in what you're already paying. There's a cost to it, but there's no discount for not using it, let's put it that way. And data loss prevention is just what it sounds like. You can set it, and I've got a bank where we've got it set like, I'm going to give you two examples. So example A is what we call the friendlier way of doing it. If you go to attach an email and you hit send, and it scans the email on the way out the door, and it sees something that hits the FFIEC's database, and it sees account number, routing number, transit number, something that triggers it. It still sends the email, in this example, but it sends an alert to IT and says, hey, Robbie Houchin just sent an email, at 12:37 p.m. that had, this data in it. You might want to go check it. So that's the benign method of setting it up. The more austere method of setting it up is Robbie hits send on that same email. To Robbie, it looks like it went. But it actually, when it got scanned and it triggered the database, it actually now goes to a manager who sees the email and it says, hey, Robbie Houchin just sent this message to Milton Bartley and it has this data in it. Do you want to allow this to go or not? And now a manager has to look at the message and make sure that that message is okay to send. And then they can say, yep, let it go, or no, send it back to Robbie. I'm oversimplifying it because there's a lot more choices in there, but those are the two main ways it works. And let me give you a real-world example of how this can help you. So I think Jack Henry's fixed this problem now, but I can tell you that a year and a half ago, this problem existed. So if you went into the Jack Henry Silver Lake Core and you opened up a loan and you wanted to get the tax documentation for that one loan, and you didn't uncheck a box that was automatically checked by default, when you hit download, you didn't get that one loan. You got the entire loan portfolio in a single PDF. Now, you had to have the right permissions at Jack Henry to do that, but this is what happened at one of our banks that we work with. A user got a call in February. It's tax time. Person said, hey, I've got this loan number, 123456. Person on the other end of the phone looks it up at the bank and says, yep, I see it. Says, I need the tax filing document to send to my CPA. Sure, no problem. This person clicked the download button. It downloaded to her computer. She's on the phone with the guy. She types up an email, gets his email address. She attaches the attachment, and she hits send. And he calls her back about 10 minutes later and says, hey, I think you sent me the wrong document. And she opens up what she sent him, and she sent him the bank's entire loan portfolio. 4,700 loans, give or take. Guess what? Those loans were not all in the state of Kentucky. Many of those loans were to people that were in Indiana, Tennessee, Texas, California, Georgia, a couple of others. You guys know how the data laws work in those states? Has nothing to do with where you are, has everything to do with where they are. So completely non-malicious, completely innocent mistake, cost that bank and or their insurance company almost $25,000 to do nothing other than go through an investigation, validate what requirements we had to report to each of those different states. And guess what? If we had had data loss prevention enabled and turned on at that bank at that time, it could have stopped that message from ever going out the door until a manager looked at it and said, oh my gosh, no, we can't send that. Because you can set thresholds in it. You can set a threshold that says, hey, you can allow it to go out with one loan number or up to 5 loan numbers, but you can't allow more than 5. There's all kinds of tools you could do to tweak this thing. So that's how data loss prevention could or should work. And then the last one is application whitelisting. How many of you have heard of a little thing called ransomware? How many of you want ransomware? No takers? No buyers today? Application whitelisting is a tool that we use, I call it the anti-ransomware tool. So without getting way too technical, the way ransomware works is it gets on your computer and it tries to run an application. It tries to actually run an executable file like Word, like Excel, like Adobe, like anything else would run. If we turn on application whitelisting, it means just what it says. We've whitelisted the applications that are allowed to run on your computer. If something tries to run on your computer that doesn't meet that list, it can't run. It's just that simple. So application whitelisting, great tool to look at. I'm going to give you guys will all have these slides. These are 9 great things to, by the way, to sit down and talk to your IT folks about and just say, hey, where are we on our journey with each of these? You're not going to do all of them today. And if you're doing all of these, great, more power to you. But if you're not going to get them all today or next week or next month, or maybe not even in the 2023 calendar year. But it's a great journey for you. So with all that, what questions do you guys have? Answer anything you got. Quiet group. That's okay. All right. Thank you so much, folks. Appreciate your time. Hope you guys have a great rest of the conference. I appreciate you being here today.